Hi, guys. Nice to see you. This is Dini here, and hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I'm always wondering if my microphone is working properly. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'll wait a second and confirm that you guys can hear me. Looks like we've got a few people on already, and more people will be hopping on. So that's wonderful. And I know Tanya and John have been to many a tasting, and you guys will see that. Craig is here from New Jersey, wonderful. And Craig's also been to one before. But for those of you, anyone tuning in just live on YouTube, or if you've never been to one of my tastings before, hi, Angie. Angie's been here before too. Then the way this works is, especially if you sign up and you RSVP with me in advance on my website, Life and Vino, then I let you know what wines I'll be tasting live and what wines I recommend to you based on our theme, or wines that are similar to it. And I help, I've helped one gentleman who's coming tonight wasn't able to find some of the wines in his local area. So he gave me his local wine store, and I was able to help him find some comparable wines at his local wine store. So we can do that too. And then we get to taste together. You get to ask all your questions. You get to have a party online with other people and chat. And, you please use the chat box to not only ask me questions, but introduce yourselves, chat amongst yourselves. It's really free form. And I love to just make this a really fun, interactive, and wonderful evening together. We're going to last about 30 minutes together. And I'm going to take you through our theme tonight is Thanksgiving wine, since that's what we have coming up next week. And also, we're going to take some time to just talk about holiday entertaining, like how many bottles of wine to buy for your holiday party, what are good things to buy, things like that, and also some of the general principles about food pairing. So we'll try and color all that. And then, of course, any questions that you have along the way, especially if you have questions about, well, like, what is she talking about, or what does that word mean? Then please let me know, keep me honest, and I will make sure to explain myself as best as I can. So that's my quick intro. If you haven't already, make sure you open your wine, start tasting your wine. Cheers to all of you. Thank you so much for joining, and thanks for spending your evening doing something a little different and hopefully fun. So cheers. And if any of you forgot to chill your white wine, as sometimes people do, the best thing you can do is to take some wet paper towels or a wet dishcloth, wrap it around the bottle, stick it in the freezer, and then set your timer for like maybe 7 minutes. And then you can take it out then, and that'll chill it enough for you to be able to enjoy it. And on the reverse side of that, if those of you have taken your white wines directly out of the fridge, they might actually be a little too cold. We can talk more about wine and temperatures, but for me, I really think that if you have a fine wine with some complexity and some interesting flavors to it, if it's too cold or refrigerator cold, it kind of mutes some of those flavors. So a good little easy trick that we do in the business is you can take some, and I like to pour just tasting size pours. I've already tasted some of this, so there's a little bit out of it, but maybe like a 2-ounce pour to pour your wine like that. And that way, when we move to the next wine or whatever, you don't have that much to all of a sudden chug if you don't have 1 glass per wine. And then you can take that wine in your glass and just kind of cup it with your hands. And this is what we would do a lot of times when, let's say, a winemaker or distributor would bring us a wine to taste, and it would be too cold or whatever. And we really wanted to get a lot of the nuances of the wine and be able to smell and taste the wine better. So we would just warm it up with our hands. So if your wine's not cold enough, you know what to do. If your wine is too cold, you know what to do. And usually I might take the wine out of the fridge about 15 minutes before I serve it. And that's generally about the right temperature for me personally. But you'll see some people really like their wine super, super cold. You might prefer that too. And I will say with bubbles, the colder it is, the more it will preserve the bubbles in there. Good. Okay, so I didn't tell you who I am really, but I'm Dini. I have a company called Life in Vino where we do these remote tastings, and I do a lot of things just to really enable you to be able to enjoy wine more, to be able to host with wine in your home, to have wine parties. I have a do-it-yourself wine tasting party kit that you can get, and you can sign up for these things, and there'll be lots more to come. This is just a new thing for me. Good. So, Thanksgiving wine pairings. If I forgot anything else. Yeah, those are all the beginnings of it. I'm going to talk to you guys about the purpose of each of these wines. If you got my email and you saw it about what to buy and what we'll be tasting, I have a sparkling wine, I have a white wine, and then also a red wine tonight. And we're not tasting dessert wine, but I'm going to talk about dessert wines as well. And I'm really going to talk about the role of each of those wines in your Thanksgiving. You may not choose to have all of them. You may choose just one of those or a couple of those, but I'll tell you what you can get out of having all of those if you so choose. And then we'll also talk about kind of more generally, aside from these specific wines, what'll make for good wine pairings. I'll talk about food pairing concepts in general. I'll generalize some of it. And then we'll talk about serving, temperature, decanting, how much to buy, and anything else that you guys want to know about the holidays. So that's our game plan. Sound good? Okay, I can't hear you, so I'm going to assume you all said, yes, let's do it. So the first thing we have that I don't know if you guys are tasting this. I have just the warm bottle because I bought a couple of these, but this is a sparkling wine from Oregon. As I mentioned in my email, for Thanksgiving, I like to take on the challenge of doing all American wines since it is an American holiday. And a lot of times I forget to drink American wines, and they can just be so, so good and delicious. And so I always like to take Thanksgiving as a moment to kind of show my gratitude for the American winemaking industry and to challenge myself to drink things that I don't personally always drink. So, for instance, I often think of champagne when it comes to bubbly, or I think of cava from Spain. But there are a lot of really great domestic sparkling wines from Sonoma, from Russian River, and also from Oregon. In particular, there's also a really great producer in New Mexico, if everyone has ever heard of Gruet. And they make really inexpensive but delicious sparkling wines as well. So those are all things you can look for. And this Melon-Meyer, I chose it because it is made in the traditional champagne method where they're doing another fermentation in the bottle in order to give the bottle its bubbles. That's kind of the whole process in brief. And then they age the wine for a while on those yeast cells, and that gives it really lovely, just like toasty characteristics. I drink my sparkling wines out of white wine glasses because I like to be able to smell them better. And this is made with the traditional champagne grapes, which are Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And so the purpose of starting out with a sparkling wine when you have a festive event like Thanksgiving is, I think it just makes any event celebratory, for one thing. So it's a great idea. As soon as you open the champagne, everybody, or the sparkling wine, everybody knows, okay, it's a party. But the other reason is really much more of a food reason. And this is why if you had one wine for the entire Thanksgiving meal, you absolutely could get away with having a sparkling wine. And that is because when I pair things with food, one of the main criteria I'm looking for is for every bite to taste as good as the first. Now, do you guys know what I'm talking about when you have the first bite of a really delicious, especially richer foods, and the first bite tastes so good? And then you go back and you kind of get used to it, and sometimes you get a little palate fatigue or whatever it is, but it overwhelms your taste buds and your senses, and you kind of get saturated with that. And it stops tasting like as delicious and as fresh as it did with that first bite. So when you have a really great wine pairing, it has something called acidity to it, which is that pucker in the wine, and has a lot of other characteristics that can refresh your mouth so that every bite tastes as good as that first bite, and sometimes even better if some of the flavors in the wine complement it. So the bubbles in a sparkling wine will just refresh your palate so nicely so that you can keep going back to the food and enjoying it. And I find that sparkling wine also tends to have that higher acidity, the pucker, and that will just make all of the rich foods of Thanksgiving. You think about, well, turkey. I'm going to talk about the turkey in a little bit, the dryness of the turkey, but it has some richness, some fattiness to it, especially if you're going for the dark meat. And certainly with the gravy and if it's basted in butter. And then, some of the rich flavors that you have with stuffing and biscuits and all of that. Just the Thanksgiving foods are very rich. So that sparkling wine is just kind of lift it and elevate it. The same is true of the white wines and the red wines that I'm going to recommend, which speaks to the broader concept of always choose wines for Thanksgiving that have that natural kind of acidity and pucker to them. That's probably my number one criteria for any wine that I'm going to choose for Thanksgiving, is that it has enough freshness to it that even when I'm having all sorts of different kinds of foods and a lot of richness and heaviness, and of course that tryptophan that makes you tired in turkey and stuff like that, you got the liveliness of your wine that you can always go back to and enjoy. Okay, am I making sense? You guys are a little quiet today. I'm used to a little more chatter and a little more questions. So feel free to pop in if any of this isn't making sense, or if it is making sense and you're like, yes, this sounds great, give me a right on. Okay, good. Angie says great info. Give me a little encouragement. So that is why to do a sparkling in short. You're making us hungry for Thanksgiving. I know. Actually, I had to make some roast chicken thighs tonight because I already got in the mood for all of my poultry. And you're having the Argyle. Awesome, Angie. I really love the Argyle wines. They make some great. You could drink Argyle. You could drink Oregon all throughout your Thanksgiving too. I think Oregon in general, the sparkling wines, the Pinot Gris and the Pinot Noirs all make for really great Thanksgiving wines. Good. Yeah, from Oregon. Love Argyle. Love those guys that are making it too. They do a really good job. Okay. So that's sparkling. If you guys have any questions about sparkling, go ahead and type it in. I'm going to move on to the concept of what I look for in my white wines. And white wines, of course, really critical when it comes to that poultry. If you don't have a white wine drinking crowd, don't go for your white wine. But for me, white wine, I love to have it, especially because also with the oven on and all the heat of the people around, I really like to drink something a little bit colder on Thanksgiving. I feel like it's a temperature refreshing quality too. And so in my white wines, the wine that I suggested for you, and you guys can let me know, by the way, everyone feel free to drop in. If you didn't buy the wines, the specific labels that I sent, let me know what you are drinking and I could speak to those wines also. But we are drinking just absolutely one of my favorite producers of California, Tablas Creek. And this is a French family. They came out of the area of Châteauneuf-du-Pape in the south of France, the Perrin family of Beaucastel. And they came to Paso Robles, to Southern California, and they decided to bring a lot of the grape varieties that they did in the Rhone and bring them to California, where they found a really great area to do that there. And the wines are delicious. Because they're made a little bit in that French style, they do have that great acidity to them. And then the other thing that you'll find specifically in this white wine is that it has beautiful aromatics. It's a blend of a bunch of different grape varieties from the Rhone Valley. And one of those is called Viognier. And Viognier is known for being really perfumey. And you guys, if you're having trouble smelling the wine, remember you can always swirl it and kind of aerate it. That volatilizes all the esters, which are the smelling compounds of the wine. Then you're going to be able to smell it much better. So give it a swirl, stick your nose in. Smells so good. And like I said, the Viognier grape, which is done in the Rhone Valley, especially in the northern Rhone region, is known for its really perfumey floral characteristics. And I think that it makes a nice combination and contrast to all the savory flavors of the Thanksgiving meal. And much like what I go for in the Pinot Noir and juicy berryness, I think there's a reason why at the Thanksgiving table, there's cranberry sauce on the table. For me, cranberry sauce is like the thing that like juiciness, that little bit of sweetness and tartness too, that brings the whole Thanksgiving meal together. And even if you're not a fan of like the cranberry sauce out of the can or whatever, like a really good cranberry sauce or chutney or whatever it is, similar to the way we do in Indian food, it kind of brings it all together. So the floral quality of the Viognier, I think, does some of that, as does Pinot Noir and the juiciness, or this is actually a Pinot Meunier, but you'll get that with Pinot Noir too. So this is my second crate. We talked about acidity being one of the really important things. And this Tablas Creek also has a grape called Grenache Blanc, and that has a lot of nice acidity to it, that freshness. So you make a great fresh cranberry sauce with persimmons. Okay, so Tanya and John, if you guys are willing to, send me the recipe for your cranberry sauce, because I would love to share that with everybody. I think that's got to be one of the benefits of doing events like this, is we got to be able to crowdsource some really good recipes and good tips from everybody. So if you're willing to, send over that cranberry sauce recipe and I'll share it with the group. So the white wine, we've got the acidity. We've maybe got some sort of nice perfumey quality to it. Or if not perfumey, you might also think of like stone fruits that come in a wine like Pinot Gris, which is another top pick of mine, because it has that acidity. And the stone fruits, you can think about a lot of stuffing recipes have like dried apricots to them or whatever. And so it kind of serves as that same flavor factor that you're getting in from the fruits, and you're also getting the acidity. And that's another reason why I think those kinds of white wines go really well with Thanksgiving fare. By the way, if anybody happens to have something other than turkey that they do for Thanksgiving and other than stuffing, I'm kind of speaking to the traditional things. I know my family, we always grew up doing Indian Thanksgiving, so we didn't have any of this stuff that I'm talking about, but I've had many traditional Thanksgiving dinners, so I'm speaking to that. But if there's something else that you guys happen to do, if it's a ham, if it's a vegan Thanksgiving or whatever it is, let me know and I can speak more specifically to those things too. Good. Okay, I'm going to take a second to see what you've written. Craig, I wasn't able to get any of the recommended wines in short order, but I did get a Pinot Gris from Oregon called Lumami. Oh gosh, I can't read my computer so far. Lumami. Okay, I don't know Lumami. Craig, let us know if you like that Pinot Gris and if you would recommend it. And if you guys also want to drop in price points and things like that, it'll be good recommendations for everybody else too, so they can know if you guys liked it. Okay, Tanya's drinking Domingue Carneros, which unbelievable, delicious, delicious California sparkling wine. I'm glad you found that one. That was one of the alternatives. And we talked about the cranberry sauce. Sounds so yummy. Okay, Craig says, totally agree about cranberry sauce. You make an adopted fresh one that has a bunch of spices, orange rind, Pinot Noir, and vanilla. Okay, you're going to send us the recipe. Awesome, guys. I love this. I'm going to share these recipes with you. And I'll also send the Indian cranberry chutney recipe that I have that my mother-in-law makes. That's really tasty. We like to do that. Good. Okay. So we talked about acidity, we talked about perfumey kind of qualities. Then we're going to move on to the red wine. So red wine options. By the way, I forgot to mention, okay, we talked about different things that you can do for white wine. So Pinot Gris for sure. Viognier is another great variety. Another thing you can go for Chardonnay. A lot of people like Chardonnay. For me, if I'm going to go with Chardonnay, I like to make sure it still has enough acidity to it. Not all Chardonnay does. Another route to go would be Chenin Blanc. So if you're more of the Chardonnay fan, you might enjoy Chenin Blanc. Chenin Blanc, to me, again, one of my favorites. It has that really nice stone fruit quality to it, and it also holds a lot of that fresh acidity as well. So these are things you can look for, especially ones from the Loire Valley. I love, 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 love them. And some people really like to do Riesling. There's no food in the world really that Riesling doesn't go with. So you could go with that also. I think the things I stay away with for white wine in general are things that just don't have enough acidity and they're very high in alcohol. So if you get 15, 16% alcohol white wines, sometimes I find that they're just too heavy and they're just as rich as all the food. And that's not really what I'm going for. But we'll talk a little bit more at the end about customization of these flavor preferences for you. So Pinot Meunier. That is the red wine that I chose. And I know, by the way, I chose some esoteric wines. And I did it for a couple of reasons. Let me know if you guys don't like the fact that I chose esoteric wines. If I should go for more mainstream ones that are easier to find, I can do that too. But what I chose this for is so that you guys could be introduced maybe to something that you wouldn't naturally think of. And also, I chose these wines because these are really actually what I'm going to drink on Thanksgiving. So when I ordered all of these from Astor Wines to have them delivered, I bought enough bottles because these are the wines that I'm going to serve at my Thanksgiving table, in addition to some other special bottles that I've been saving for a while. And I chose Pinot Meunier. So Pinot Meunier is a grape that you usually see in Champagne. You don't see it because Champagne isn't red, but it is blended in along with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and the grapes are pressed very gently, so you don't get any of the color from the grape skins. And the reason why it's blended in Champagne is for the really, really great fleshy fruitiness that Pinot Meunier has to offer. So I thought it was really cool that some American producers, some California producers, are now starting to take Pinot Meunier and make it into a red wine because you get the benefits of Pinot Noir. And if you're not able to find Pinot Meunier in your area, you can always go with Pinot Meunier because you can always go with Pinot Noir because they're related, and they offer some of the same goodness to your Thanksgiving meal, which is going back to that concept of the cranberry sauce. It is that um, binding that brings the whole meal together. It's that juiciness, and even a little bit of the tartness that you get from a cranberry sauce. All of those things you're really going to get in a Pinot Noir or a Pinot Meunier. Now, the difference between a Pinot Meunier and a Pinot Noir, and by the way, I'll send you guys the spelling of Pinot Meunier, is that you're going to get less tannins in Pinot Meunier. And tannins are an important thing to understand when it comes to food pairings. So tannins are the kind of bitterness that you taste in a red wine, that you sometimes in a white wine, that you also get at the end of a cup of black tea. You know that bitterness? So that's tannins. And it comes from the skins or the seeds or sometimes the oak barrels from the wine. And you basically will find that tannins for me are a little bit tough when there's too much tannin. It's tough to do with poultry because it kind of overwhelms it. And tannins also, if you guys know that bitterness in black tea, it dries out your mouth. So it dries out your tongue. And all of us that cook turkeys on Thanksgiving, because now I'm cooking a turkey, know that the number one thing we're trying to do is trying not to dry out the turkey. So then how terrible if you have a wine that then like kind of dries out the turkey. So I prefer to do wines without a lot of tannin. And so that's why I kind of thought this Pinot Meunier was so fun because you have all of the fruitiness, the freshness, the liveliness of the Pinot Noir, but you have even less tannin. Now, most Pinot Noirs don't have that much tannin, so you're perfectly fine going with a Pinot Noir. Another alternative that I love that I saw, Craig, you also recommend is Gamay, which is the grape that's in Beaujolais. So Beaujolais, the region of France, but you can also find a lot of domestic producers are doing Gamay. And actually, that's one of the other wines that I got for my Thanksgiving meal too, is a domestic California Gamay. Gamay is the grape variety. And again, it just has all that really beautiful, perfumey, luscious, ripe fruit to it. But it still also has all of the freshness, the acidity. So we didn't lose that characteristic also. So, okay, I'm going to take a second and see what you guys are letting me know. So every year we generally have a Beaujolais Nouveau or my dad's homemade wine at Thanksgiving. Is that wrong? Okay, so Tanya, I didn't even read that you wrote that, but absolutely not. That is so right. So Beaujolais Nouveau, as you guys know, comes out the week before Thanksgiving. There's the grand release of the Nouveau, which is new in French, and it just means the new fresh wine. This is wine that's meant to be consumed young. It's absolutely perfect for Thanksgiving. It's a really, really classic pairing, I think, with Thanksgiving. You'll find a lot of sommeliers having their Beaujolais Nouveau with their Thanksgiving meals. So that's awesome. So it's a small production Pinot Gris from Willamette Valley. Oh, right. This is the Lumami. And it's made by Laurent Montalieu. Awesome. Very enjoyable, crisp, floral, true to variety, and good value at $14. Okay, so I hope you guys all saw Craig's recommendation. Craig knows what he's talking about, so I definitely would love to try that. And $14, that's an amazing price point. I did go a little bit higher on the price points than I normally do for these tastings because I thought for Thanksgiving, people might want some special wines to be able to choose from. You can have special wine at $14 too. You're having the Pinot Project wine. Love that wine. Good. So you always drink Beaujolais Village at Thanksgiving and love it. Good. Yes, I would make this distinction. So if you're going to go with Beaujolais, go for Beaujolais Nouveau or go for Beaujolais Village, which is the village level, means the grapes can come from anywhere in the village, as opposed to a cru Beaujolais, which means it comes from one specific village. And in those cases, they tend to have a little bit more of the tannin to them. So they might be too structured unless they're aged, maybe they're 5, 6 or more years old, and then it'll start to soften. And that's another route you can go, by the way, for those of you either with collections or you shop at stores that have aged wines. As a wine ages, the tannins will soften. So it's another way of getting a wine with a lot of great flavors to it, but not too much of the drying tannin. Good. All right. Love it that you guys are on this. Okay. So we talked about all those things. So Pinot Noir, Beaujolais, Zinfandel is another one. You got to make sure you have one without too much tannin. The Sagacio, Sonoma County, that's always one of my favorites. Zinfandels. It's very findable everywhere and delicious and not too much tannin and not too expensive. So then the last thing is dessert wines. And Craig had sent me an email asking about like which of these wines do you pair with like a pumpkin pie or pecan pie or some of the traditional Thanksgiving desserts. And I don't know, for me, I would go sparkling definitely with dessert. I think that's a great place to end up or continue on throughout the night. Or I just love dessert wine. And any opportunity to have a chance for dessert wine, I welcome. So Thanksgiving is no exception. And in fact, if you're not a baker and you just want to have like a cheese plate with a pumpkin pie and things like that, and then you really make the focus of the dessert be the dessert wine itself, that's another great route to go. I have a whole guide that I did about dessert wines last year for Thanksgiving. And it kind of helps you understand all the categories of dessert wine and everything like that, and some specific recommendations of ones that I love. So I will send that to you guys as well, along with all of our recipes, so that you can dive more into dessert wine. But I will tell you this right now, which is that people always tell me like, oh, no, I don't like sweet wines. I don't like sweet wines because I think they heard somewhere that it's like gauche or it's not like super sophisticated to like sweet wines. But it's just not true. Because Chateau Yquem is one of the most expensive wines in the world, and it's a sweet wine, for instance. But the thing is that I often take people a bottle of dessert wine as a dinner party gift, as a hostess gift when I go to their house. And a lot of times they'll open it up, which you don't have to, by the way. And what I find is that whenever people taste it and they open it up and they have it, people always swoon over that. And even at my own dinner parties, I will go through all the effort of, like cooking all this great food and choosing all these wines. And we'll get to the dessert wine and people will always be like, oh, Dini, this was my favorite part of the whole meal. And they love it even more than any dessert that I painstakingly cooked. They love it more than any of the other wines because I think it's just one of those things that people haven't had enough of. So when they have a good one, it just floors them. And Craig, I know you were asking about some of my favorites. So, I love a great ice wine. And there's some great ice wines out of Canada, for instance, or even New Zealand does some really reasonably priced ice wines. But one of my favorites for Thanksgiving, because of the pumpkin pie, for the pecan pie, all that, is a Vinsanto, which is a Tuscan and Italian dessert wine. And I fell in love with the wine because it has a really nice kind of nutty quality to it, some dried apricots, even a little like saffron spice quality about the wine. And it's the one that, like people dip biscotti in and eat. It's delicious with fruits and cheeses and things like that too. It'll work with all of that. I know that's not domestic, I'll have to make sure that on my dessert wine list, I have some domestic dessert wines. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any domestic dessert wines that I love, but I'll come back to that. Oh, but no, certainly ones from the Finger Lakes region. So there's some good Riesling dessert wines, either some late harvest or also some ice wines that are done from the Finger Lakes. Good. Right. Pecan pie and bean santo. You kidding me, Craig? This is like the greatest combination ever. You got to tell me after you have some because it's so, so good. And I think I mentioned one of my favorite bean santo producers on there, the Viña del Papa, which has like a beautiful Pope hat on the label. And it's just divine. It's to die for. Go find it. Good. Okay, so we talked about dessert wine, how to serve them. I cover that in my guide also about which ones you should chill, which ones you don't need to chill, all of that. Okay, my other tip. Wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about decanting. Oops, went fuzzy for a second there. Decanting. So it's tricky depending on how many people you have coming to Thanksgiving. It's tricky to decant wines because if you don't have, I think I only have 3 decanters in house, but most people have 1, maybe 1. So my trick for you is to do something called double decanting. It's something that we do in the wine industry. And it means decanting, by the way, is a great way to open up any wine. I decant just about everything, not sparkling wine, but I decant white wines, I decant red wines, I decant dessert wines, all sorts of wines, because it just opens them up. That same thing that we got from swirling the wine, you're going to get that same thing even magnified when you decant a wine. But if you can't, decant bottles and bottles of wine and leave them all sitting out, a good trick or a hack is to take the wine. I'm not going to pour it in the decanter right now. Pour it into the decanter, or if you don't have a decanter, a flower vase, a water pitcher, whatever you got, even wine glasses. And then after you decant it in here, kind of swirl it around. If you have the time, leave it out for 10 minutes or whatever, then pour it back into the bottle. And then when you do that, you'll have introduced the air to the wine. And that way, when you go to serve the wines and you've set them out and someone pours it straight out of the bottle, it's already opened up and it's delicious and ready to drink. I can tell you that these wines here, since I opened them before the tasting, they've already changed so much. Like every time I go back to smell this, I'm like, oh, it's getting better and it's getting better. It's just opens up. You can smell it so much more. And it gets a little softer, a little fleshier in the palate and things. By the way, if my descriptors of the wines, when I talk about them, if those words don't really make sense to you, come back and join one of my other tastings, because in some of the other tastings, we do deep dives into those terms. Like, for instance, we did a whole tasting on body where we had 2 wines, one with low body, one with high body, and we tasted those and we just spent the whole time talking about how you can identify body. So we do more of that in other ones, but here I'm going kind of quickly to move through all of the holiday topics. But if anything doesn't make sense, you can come back. Great tip. Okay, good. Yay. You guys are with me. So ways to serve it, blah, blah, blah. Wines that don't work well. We talked about that. Food pairing philosophy. So another thing that I'll send you guys if you want it is something that I invented, because a lot of times when people talk about food and wine pairings, the wine industry, myself included, because I've been doing this the whole time, we say that there's like an answer, like with really rich foods, you should drink something with high acidity, for instance, is like, one of those truisms that I say a lot. But the real truth is that we all experience tastes of food and wine differently because of our own body chemistry. Because as soon as you take a sip of that wine, it's getting introduced to even your own personal saliva. And that's different for everybody because all our body chemistry is different. So it tastes different to everyone, and we all crave and enjoy different flavors. So I was really thinking about, like, how do I solve that problem? So I came up with my wine and food choose your own adventure pairing. And it's just kind of in beta or testing right now. But it's a whole process of going through, taking a dish, say salmon. Say you were trying to do a wine pairing with salmon, and thinking about, like, well, what flavors sound good to me? Would it sound better if I had lemon with it, or honey, or some kind of berry sauce, or like a pepper, like a spice? Like, which of those flavors am I most craving with that salmon, that piece of salmon. And then depending on which of those flavors you choose, and kind of experiences you choose, I have a suggested set of wines to choose from. So this is another route, and I'll send you guys that. My good friend Veronica, who's a beautiful illustrator, drew that picture of the chart for me, and I think it's really cool. And maybe you guys can test it out for yourselves and let me know what you think. So, okay. Do you guys have questions about any of this so far? I think the only other thing I wanted to make sure to tell you is in terms of how much wine to buy, aside from saying lots. I mean, you have to know your crowd. And if you've hosted before, you're going to someone else's house, you probably may already have a sense of your crowd and what they drink. But if you're not sure and you're taking a shot in the dark, two rules of thumb that we go by in the wine industry. When I worked in retail and we were trying to help people with their parties, we would always tell them, estimate approximately 1 drink per person per hour. And this is just an average, because I know some of you are going like, well, I drink way more than 1 drink an hour, and that's true. But over the course of the whole night, or the whole course of the whole event, on average, that's what your group will drink. Now, you can always estimate upwards for that if you know your crowd is a little bit heavier drinking. And of course, you want to take just the people who are alcohol drinking, so you wouldn't count your kids in that. Or the people who don't drink alcohol. But you just think about it. And then based on that, you can divide it up and say like, oh, like maybe I want to go with, like for my crowd, I go with like a quarter of those people, a quarter of those drinks are going to be cocktails, a quarter is going to be beer, and the other 50% is going to be wine. So let's say I had 10 people for 5 hours. So that's 50 drinks. And half of those, so about 25 drinks worth of wine. And then I know that I get about 5 glasses per bottle. So then I would buy 5 bottles of wine. I don't know. I hope that math's making sense to you. I'm doing it on the fly, so hopefully I didn't do any of it incorrectly. But you guys can get the sense of 1 drink per person per hour. And then you can think about the spread of like, okay, what all do I have? Is it only wine? Is it a combination of beer, cocktails, liquor? I don't know, whatever else. Another simpler way. So that was what we used to do in retail, because we were really trying to like get it fine-tuned. A simpler way of doing it is like for your general dinner portion of when people are seated and having their meals, about half a bottle of wine per person is what I estimate. And then you can take, if you've got hours of kind of appetizers and grazing ahead of time, you can add on some bottles of bubbly or something else to go with that portion of it too. So those are 2 ways of estimating how much. And then my other tip. Some of you know this about me, but I had the great fortune of doing an event, a dinner party at Julia Child's house. We got to cook in her kitchen. I got to decant and serve the wines, and had the joy of just watching her entertain in her house. And one thing that I'll never, never forget is that she used to enjoy herself so much. And for me, it was like a huge aha light bulb moment in life, because it was like, right, you spent all this time planning, and I'm one of the best planners. I've got a spreadsheet for everything. And we spend the time cooking, and we spend all that time. And then we get to the meal, and sometimes we're like, nervous and looking over after everybody and making sure everything gets done. And you don't realize that not only did you not have a great time, but you actually limit the amount of fun your guests can have, because you kind of set the bar, is what she taught me. And by being the person having the most fun at your own dinner, at your own gathering and things like that, I think you really elevate the whole party and give everybody else permission to just absolutely have so much fun too. So my tip is that 1 hour or more before your event starts and before people start coming over, turn on your music, open up your wine, start drinking, start tasting, start doing whatever you need to do to start getting yourself in the mood and enjoying yourself. And then really savor the moments with all of your loved ones and with this beautiful event and evening that you're creating. So that's maybe not so much of a wine tip, but it comes from my personal idol, who's Julia Child. And by the way, she didn't always drink super fancy, expensive wines. I always tell the story of how she used to drink just like beautiful, effervescent, pink country wine, pink fizzy country wine. Good. So, is there something you like to drink when you are cooking and getting ready? I mean, bubbles for sure, absolutely. But sometimes, for some reason, I want something cold because I'm usually in the kitchen and I'm moving around and I'm hot and everything like that. So I just look for something cold, but something really light and refreshing, whether it's bubbles or a great Chenin Blanc, even like whatever wine I started cooking with would be a great option too. Like sometimes I just have some cheap Pinot Grigio open and I'm like, oh, great, this is perfect. I can just start drinking this. Good. And yes. Okay. So thank you for helping us up our mind game this Thanksgiving. It is my pleasure. Thank you all so, so much. If you have other questions, feel free to email me your questions. I really want you to know that I'm here for you. Oh, okay. I have one other comment from somebody new, so I want to make sure I get to this. Stereo Dreamer 23. I like to pour multiple types of wine for Thanksgiving. It's such a complex combination of flavors that I like to start with bubbles, move to a white, and then finish with a red. Yeah, exactly. And I think the really nice thing about that is you're giving options to various people who like different things too. So I think it's really lovely and elegant when you can do all of that. I've also been in situations where I'm just like, I just want to make it as simple as possible. Everybody at this entire meal is going to drink one wine. So that way I only have one thing to chill, one type of glass to think about. Anyways, I highly, highly recommend you only use one type of glass. I have given up on using all different shapes of glasses because I don't find it makes that big a difference personally. I even have my sparkling wines in regular wine glasses. Good. All right. Awesome. Thank you for that comment. And yes, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Happy early Thanksgiving. Happy holidays. And signing off. Cheers. Bye bye.